Iowa City is a unique community. This uniqueness is shaped by the people who contribute their ideas, their gifts, and their energy to the life of Iowa City and the university. Welcome to a series of biographical interviews of special women and men who have affected this community. Their lifelong contributions have been valuable, their lives creative and full. What brought them here? Who influenced them? What changes in their field have they witnessed? These and other questions will be explored during this series of interviews entitled, Tell Me Your Story. Gladys Gardner Jenkins is a recognized authority on child rearing and family relations. She lectured for many years at the University of Iowa in education and home economics. Gladys Jenkins is the author and co-author and consultant of 11 books on children, teenagers, health, and safety. She also is the author of more than 100 articles in the field of parent education and child development. She has taught students, parents, teachers, nurses, social workers. One person stated that, quote, "She was the calm through the storm of child rearing, the voice of reason amid the parenting fads of the past 4 decades." Gladys, welcome to Tell Me Your Story.
I'm very glad to be here.
Your story begins in England, where you were born. What brought you to this country?
Well, first of all, I think you should know that I was born in the year that Queen Victoria died. Now, I don't know what significance that has had in my life, but it must have been something.
1901.
1901. And in 1912, my father, who was a minister, came, and it was quite adventurous to do this in those days, came over to this country in the summer to speak at the church in Chicago and a church in Portland, Maine. And at the end of the summer, he was on the ship to come back when he got cables from both these churches giving what he calls a call to be their minister. So he had all his stuff taken off the ship, and he stayed in this country. And he chose Chicago. So that's where we began our life in America.
Well, was your mother quite disturbed when she received this cable?
I can still see the picture very vividly in my mind of my mother reading this cable with all of us gathered around her sitting on the floor and telling us that we had to go to America. And this to her was something that was really never had been considered. And then all the uncles came. My mother had 5 brothers. They all came and they packed up all the wrong things, and in January we set out for this country, and we hit a storm, and the lifeboats were blown away, and our cabin window, the waves came through, and we finally, 4 days late, arrived at Ellis Island with a ship covered with ice and a very frantic father. That was our introduction to America.
And then you arrived in Chicago and went to school there.
And went to school in Chicago, and we lived there for a good many years until I went on to college.
Well, you received your BA from Pomona College and your MA at the University of Chicago. You came back to Chicago.
I came back to our good old haunts.
While you were getting your MA, you were married, and there's a story about this.
Yes, we were married. My husband and I were not supposed to get married in those days. And so I lost my job that I was teaching school because I became a married woman. And he almost got thrown out of medical school because he had married. He was called into the office of the dean. We had done a disgraceful thing to get married. Then we had a child, and when I finished my master's degree, I had a little daughter, but I wanted a PhD, so I went to the head of the department and told him I'd like to go ahead, and he looked at me, and he said, "Young lady, I have only allowed 6 women to ever get a PhD, and I'd never allow one who was a mother with a child." So I was completely phased out. You have no idea of the differences in those days.
My goodness. Well, where did at this time, did you decide to focus on children and child rearing and development of children?
Well, at that particular time, I was focusing on my own child. And then when my child was 2 years old, an opportunity came, which was a very sad one. The Great Depression hit, and Chicago was in turmoil. And there was a cry out for college people to please come and act as caseworkers, even though we had no training. So I, I joined the group, and I had a district given to me to take care of 4 blocks by 15, where I had 425 Italian families, all out of work. And I was supposed to take care of them.
In what way? Finding them social services that they could take advantage of?
No, they came down. We had our own social services developed in the city, where we gave out food baskets, horrible things. Don't know how people ever ate them. And we paid for coal and listened to their problems and things of that kind. But it was an impossible situation. And a person who has not gone through the Depression doesn't know what it was like. It was incredible.
So then after
that, I began to go as a volunteer. And I often talked with parents and was interested in that. And then the war came. And it was really the war that threw me into my professional area. I had gone back to the University of Michigan to seek that old PhD degree, and then the war hit that one out. And my professor was asked to work with the Red Cross on helping parents to know how to interpret the war and the loss of their fathers and the tragedies of the war, and he couldn't go. So he sent me, and I went for several months to talk with parents through this Red Cross group. And I found that I could talk with parents, and I began to be very deeply interested in their problems. And so afterwards, I simply stayed in that field and went ahead. And from that point on, things sort of all merged together.
And you came to Iowa City?
We came in '61.
'61.
But before that, I had worked in Chicago with the Association for Family Living, which was a parent education group, and in Washington, D.C. So I've met lots of parents in lots of different places.
You authored, consulted, and co-authored 11 books, and these are just a few of them. The camera can get it. Some of the titles include These Are Your Children, You're Growing Up, Into Your Teens, Growing and Changing, Helping Children Reach Their Potential, and a series on health for young people. These, like you told me earlier, are professional books, not trade books. And These Are Your Children has reached a wide audience. Explain about that in the book.
This book has been quite a charmer. I've loved it. It is now in its 4th edition, and it is still going after all these many years. It was originally planned as a book for teachers and for students in universities, and it simply tells about children as they are developing through life. But the thing that intrigues me is that children seem to be the same everywhere, because this book has been translated into Spanish. It's been used from Mexico to Argentina, and it's been translated into Arabic of all places, showing that children must be more or less the same in whatever country, because otherwise, why would they want an American book?
Do you ever get correspondence from people who in other countries who read your book?
Yes, I have had. Another interesting thing is I got a letter from the the head of the education department in Liberia, of all places, in which they had just received it, and all the copies had gone, and please send us another load quickly. And at the same time, it was being used in Australia. So that is that wonderful span that gives you a feeling of children everywhere are children, whatever country they seem to be in.
You have one of the titles of the chapters is called The Runabout Years, and I think that must be a British expression.
I hadn't realized it, it probably was, but doesn't it show beautifully what a 2.5 and 3-year-old are?
Definitely.
They really are the runabout children.
They are the runabout. You said that children are the same all over. What are some of the universal truths in this book?
Well, I think what we tried to do in that book was to show how children grow, how they develop, how they are human, how they have feelings in particular, and that you have to know each individual little youngster, and that if you can approach children as friendly, if you're friendly with children, then you can handle the discipline. Friendly firmness is a phrase I used to use in that book, which I think is a universal phrase that could be used. Friendly firmness. We went through all kinds of fatty times, you know, where children must do everything they do, their libidos must be free and so on. We ended up in all kinds of problems. And I think what we tried to do in this book was to bring some common sense into the situation, and yet to point out how very individual little people are and how very much they feel. And a lot of parents don't realize, and teachers don't always realize, how much a child feels. And I think that was one thing we were trying to get across.
Over the years, what question or questions have parents asked you as kind of an expert on this subject? Have they changed much?
I don't think they've changed much, although that there are definitely changes in children today. But discipline always was the first question they asked. How can I make my child behave? How can I make them do this? And that's why I talk so much about the child's point of view, because it was that word make that I always felt was upsetting to parents. Why were they always trying to make a child do something instead of leading a child into doing something? So I think discipline was the first. And then, believe it or not, sex education back in the 1930s was very much a question, just as much as it is today. And when I was working with the Association of Family Living in Chicago, we used to give courses on sex education after school hours to children in the public schools in Chicago, with the help of their parents, who we would always meet with the parents. So that was a very, very major question even back there. The two universals, which are still the universals today, with lots of things in between.
During the past 6 decades that you've been a part of, what have you seen as the major changes in child rearing, teenagers, and family relations?
Well, I think one of the things is what you and I talked about earlier, and that has been the seesaw effect. So that at one period, we went in the early years, when I was first teaching, through the very rigid period of Watson and Dr. Thumb with his habit training.
And Watson was what?
Watson was the one who said, give me any 4 children and I can turn them into anything I want them to be.
Conditioning.
Yeah, conditioning, definitely conditioning, and very rigid conditioning. There was no leeway at all, and Dr. Thumb followed him with his books on habit training. Your child had to be trained in habits. And there was a lovely story. I was studying at the University of Chicago at that time, taking a course in which I was told that if I put a snowsuit on a child, you always put the right foot in first, and then the right arm, and then the left foot, and then the left arm. So that was the beginning. And then came Dr. Spock. And Dr. Spock...
Talk about Dr.
Well,
Spock.
Dr. Spock was needed. He was a blessed relief. People were so... the rules were so rigid on how to bring up children, the things you must do and the things you must not do, that Dr. Spock's book came as a breath of fresh air. And people read it from cover to cover. It was... he really did us a tremendous service. Some people say he went over too far, but it was necessary at that time. And I could go on with the different
Please do. It's fascinating.
Well,
and after
then came Freud, you see, and with Freud came all the theories of libido and so on, and people went overboard in letting their children express themselves and express their feelings.
The permissiveness.
Permissiveness, ultra-permissiveness. So then we swung back a bit, and we began to realize that some discipline was necessary. And we came in the 40s into a rather stable period in which perhaps it was the effect of the war that made us sober up a little bit, in which feelings were still emphasized, the feelings of children, the emotions of children, but the balance was there, that there had to be some stability. There had to be some rules, some things that children couldn't do, and those rules would grow and lessen as children got older.
Do you think in the 60s the pendulum swang back to permissiveness?
It began to swing. You see, it's always back and forth. And in the 50s and today, there were two very interesting things. When Sputnik, if you remember good old Sputnik, went up, we became panicked in this country. And we began to tighten down on the schools were not doing enough. We put pressures on children, and we began giving college courses to high school seniors until they really rebelled. And it looks to me today as if we're panicking again with Japan, and that we may be going to go overboard with pressures on young people. It's very obvious at the little child end, where instead of having learning by play, which is the normal way for a child, we are now trying to make 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds read and do the things that youngsters used to do at a later age. And I look on this with great concern. And I think we are going to discourage many children at the high school level who can't possibly live up to the standards that we are about to impose. So I see these as dangers that we're going to see, and I hope we can keep a balance somewhere.
So things have changed now in the area of teenagers and parenting teenagers also.
And at the beginning end.
In the beginning
and
too.
At the beginning end. A lot of people who work with little children are very concerned about the pressures that are being put now on little children, and making them perhaps feel discouraged by the time they're in 1st and 2nd grade. And and I think that is very sad. Now, the other thing that has grown over the years, which is very different, is the drug situation and the plunging into experiences that are beyond them of junior high school and older youngsters into sexual activity. And that has always existed, but not with the great pressures down on the young children. And I think that is something that we haven't yet analyzed why it is happening, although we have a good many suppositions of why it is happening. And I think the problems for parents today are really greater than they ever have been. Partly because the parents themselves are tense and are overstrained.
Do you think it's also that they're busy? Do you think they're busier than other parents in other decades?
Well, certainly mothers are busier, but I would never say that mothers shouldn't be busy. But I think that these things do add up, and I think our own lack of, perhaps I'm wrong here, that our own fears that Japan and other countries will surpass us are giving us a warped feeling. We are not looking at children as something to help them grow in their own ways. We're looking at children as future commodities. And I think that is causing problems.
So friendly firmness.
Friendly firmness.
And common sense,
yes.
obviously.
And understanding that children have feelings, and that children need to be helped to develop in their own way.
In your book, Helping Children Reach Their Potential, are these some of the things you stressed?
That was a very interesting little book. That was based on the questions teachers asked me in my classes.
And what were teachers asking them?
And teachers were asking very much the same things, of course, that parents were, how to handle children and how to bring them along. They were concerned at some of the rigidities that were handed down and are still handed down today from above, where children were supposed to all do the same things in the same way at the same time. And they felt that how were they going to circumvent that? And interestingly enough, I got a letter from my granddaughter this last week saying she's a wonderful teacher. And in new school, she was disturbed because she was told how to teach instead of being allowed to teach in her own way, which had been successful. And those were some of the things they asked, but there's so many, you know.
What contributions are you the most pleased about that you've been a part of?
Well, I think I'm pleased with the relationships I had all over the years with the people whom I taught. I think that was a great gift to me. I had wonderful rapport with my students, and we were comfortable with each other. And I talked with many different kinds of parents. I was able to see so many different things. In Chicago, for instance, from the association, one night I might go down to one of the housing projects and talk with people there. And the next day I might be talking on Northwestern campus. And the feeling that you got that parents and people were the same and children were the same, but some problems were more intense than others. And I think the feeling that if you could help teachers or parents to do a little thinking and to be relaxed was one of the things that I've felt the best about. Yeah.
You have dealt with the subject of youth most of your life, and now you are personally dealing with another aspect of living, aging. In an interview I read recently, you stated, quote, "Growing old is a difficult process, but it becomes much more difficult if links have never been developed." I'm fascinated with this, Gladys. Would you share and expand on this?
I feel very strongly about that, because now I am not working with children. I am living with old people. In other words, my friends are all getting older, my family are older. It is not easy to grow old. And I get very fed up with the people who talk about the cheery old folks. They can be cheery, but it is not a cheery part of life. Now, if you have had links, if you have built your family links, built links with friends, built links with thoughts, with books, with interests, with the work you have done, and if you, your hobbies, whatever it is, you may love your garden, but you have things that have meant a lot to you and have brought a string of links into your life, then you're going to have to lose many of those links. But if you can save some that are very vital and very precious, you'll make it. And I feel very saddened by those who have lost or given up or never really developed links. People can float through life without really having things that have great meaning to them. And I think if you can build those links of meaning, you'll get through.
And you say it can be hobbies?
It can be anything
church,
that is real,
gardening.
that is real to you, that you've not just slid through, but that things that you really want to do. And you may build others, but not very many as you get old. You're going to have to rely on those that you have had. And it's the rare old person who becomes a Grandma Moses. Very nice when they do.
You have to say goodbye to a lot of things.
You have to say goodbye to many things, and I think that is something that younger people perhaps don't understand. They look at a parent perhaps and think, oh, now I better put that parent in a nursing home. That may be true. It may be the very best thing in the world, but they need to work slowly, because that parent is having to break the links with the home, the links with their belongings, the links with their neighbors, with their friends. Many of those links will have to be broken. And if some of those links can be carried along and can be respected by the young person and worked with by the young person, things will be much happier.
And wouldn't you think that person who is leaving all these links is scared?
I'm sure they're scared. It's a scary thing to leave behind all your links. And I think we are too apt to forget that. And I think even helping them to take some things with them. Something that means the past. You can't wipe out your past. And your past is a very important part of you.
What are you working on now? What are you
am I
doing with
working
your
on? I'm
days?
throwing out 40 years of teaching. Cleaning out my files.
Well, that's a good project.
Well, it is a good project, and it's a fascinating one. Because as I clear them out, I stop and read, and I find, well, now that's interesting. That happened so many years ago, 40 years ago, and by heck, it's still happening today. So it isn't a sad thing. And I hate to give it all up, but it's interesting. Then I keep up with my reading, and we keep up with public events, and we keep up with our friends, and we do very well.
And you're reading, what are you reading these days?
Well, I always start out with the Washington Post. Now, isn't that silly?
No, I think that's wonderful.
I lived in Washington, and that's a very real link I have to Washington.
See, there's one of your links again.
Yeah, links, and I read all kinds of things, from mysteries. I just finished Ann Tyler's book, which I found very, very interesting. What's the title of it?
Homesick.
No, that's not the one. Oh, well, it doesn't matter. It was the research. Breathing lessons.
Breathing lessons.
It attracted me because I thought the title was fascinating.
And you found it so.
And I found it so. And then I picked up another one called All You'll Ever Learn, You Learned in Kindergarten. And I thought it was silly.
You thought it was silly.
I thought the man had a delightful title, an excellent first chapter, and the rest was like the USA Today, little nibbles.
Nibble.
So we have a varied lot of things. I look at my library and think, will I ever read it all?
And you're starting to do all the wonderful cleaning out, but I'm sure it's going to take you a long, long time, of 40 years of,
well, it does.
Of lecturing and teaching.
And it's fascinating.
Thank you so much for being my guest.
Well, it's been nice to be here with you.
My guest on Tell Me Your Story has been Gladys Gardner Jenkins, recognized authority in the field of child development, parent, and teacher education. Gladys has co-authored, authored, consulted on 11 professional books and has written some 100 articles on the subject of child rearing and family relations. She is a U of I lecturer emerita in home economics. One of her books, These Are Your Children, is in its 4th edition and has been translated into Spanish and Arabic. As a writer and a lecturer, she has enlightened and enhanced children, parents, students, and teachers locally, nationally, and abroad. Gladys Gardner Jenkins has indeed enriched our community.